Welcome to a special edition of the Deep Dive. We are shifting our format just a little bit today because, frankly, the signal we're looking at really demands it.
It does.
This isn't just another deep dive. We're launching something new here. The first installment of what we're calling cybersecurity under pressure. Real attacks, real lessons.
And it's a fitting title, you know? We're seeing this shift in the landscape where these theoretical vulnerabilities are becoming operational realities, and they're doing it much, much faster than defense teams can really adapt.
Exactly, and that's why we're going to take a slightly different approach with this one. We really want this to be our most didactic session yet.
Right.
We know our listeners are smart. You work in IT, you work in OT, you understand the fundamentals. We don't need to explain what a computer is. But this specific topic, the virtualization layer,
Right.
it often sits in a kind of blind spot, you know?
It's a black box for a lot of people. It just works until it doesn't.
Until it doesn't. And today, we're going to open that box.
We're going to treat this almost like a seminar. We're not just reporting the news. We are going to break down the mechanics of a very specific, very dangerous failure mode that is, it's threatening the very foundation of modern digital infrastructure.
So if you're driving to work or maybe you're in the server room right now listening on your phone, get ready. We're going deep. The topic is what we're calling the vanishing floor. Specifically, we're talking about the weaponization of VMware ESXi, and we're going to focus on CVE 2025, 2022, 25.
And this is the one. This is the vulnerability that CISA, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, for anyone who doesn't know, they've flagged this as a confirmed active threat. This isn't research anymore. It's ransomware.
Before we get into the kernel level guts of this, I want to set the scene. I want to talk about this scenario hook from our research notes because it paints a picture that is, honestly, it's more terrifying to me than some Hollywood explosion because it's so quiet.
It's always the silence that gets you. It's the absence of something that should be there.
Right. So I want you to picture a standard control room. It could be any plant, any facility. It's a Tuesday. You're an operator, maybe an engineer. You're looking at your HMIs, your human-machine interfaces.
The big screens.
The big screens, yeah. The pumps show green, the valves show open. The physical process, from all appearances, it seems fine. But then you notice something off. You look at the historian trends, the graphs that show temperature over time, pressure over time.
Yeah, the squiggly lines.
Now, squiggly lines have gone flat. They've just flatlined.
And that's the stale data problem.
Right.
That's the first indicator. The screen looks alive, but the heart has stopped beating. The data feed is dead.
Exactly. So your first instinct is, okay, standard troubleshooting. Let me try to remote into the historian server, maybe restart the service. You open up your remote desktop connection, you type in the server name, you hit enter, and it just hangs.
Connecting.
Just connecting forever.
And this is where the confusion really sets in, right? Because your mind immediately goes to the usual suspects. Is it the network? Did a switch die?
So you do the next logical thing. You open a command prompt, you ping the server, and it replies. You get packets back. The network stack is up, so it's not the network. But you can't log in.
Okay.
Then you try to access the engineering file share to maybe grab a network diagram or a config file. That share is unreachable. You try to log into the jump server you use for remote access. Gone. Just vanished.
And that's the moment. That's when the cold realization starts to hit you. The problem isn't the application. It's not even the operating system of that Windows server.
No. The problem is that the virtualization floor has moved. The hypervisor itself, the software that simulates reality for all of those servers, it has been compromised.
And when that happens, everything you think you know about your environment becomes a question mark. You're not fighting a fire in one room anymore. The very laws of physics in that entire building have just been rewritten by an attacker.
That is the vanishing floor. And today we're going to explain exactly how that happens, why it has become the new favorite target for ransomware groups, and maybe most importantly, how you hunt for it and how you fix it.
And we need to move beyond just the high-level metaphors today. We absolutely have to talk about the VMX process, the kernel boundary, and the specific logs that you need to be grepping for right now.
Okay, let's start with part one then, the mechanics. We're breaking the glass.
Let's do it.
So we often use that analogy of a landlord and tenants to explain hypervisors. The ESXi host is the landlord, the building owner. The VMs are the tenants in their apartments. But you mentioned that's maybe a bit too 101 for this specific vulnerability. We need to get more technical.
We do.
So what's actually happening inside the silicon, inside the server, when we talk about ESXi?
Right. Let's drop the landlord analogy for a minute and talk architecture. ESXi is what's known as a Type 1 hypervisor, and that's a really key distinction. It means it runs directly on the hardware, on the bare metal. It's not an application you install on Windows or Linux. It is the operating system of that server.
Okay, so it owns the hardware.
It owns everything. Its entire job is to be a traffic cop for resources. It schedules CPU cycles. It allocates pages of memory. It manages I/O requests from the disk for all of the guest virtual machines that run on top of it.
And to do that safely, it has to isolate them from each other.
Correct. And it doesn't do this just with software tricks. It uses hardware-assisted virtualization. The CPU in your server itself has different privilege levels. We used to call them rings.
Ring 0, ring 3.
Exactly. Well, the hypervisor runs in an even more privileged mode. Some people call it ring mash 1, or in Intel's terms, VMX root mode. The guest VMs, your Windows and Linux servers, they run in a much less privileged mode. They think they have direct access to the hardware, but they don't. It's an illusion. They're trapped inside a sandbox.
And here comes CVE 2025-2225. This vulnerability, the sources say, targets that guest-to-host boundary, and they specifically call out the VMX process. What is that? What's a VMX process?
This is absolutely critical to understand. For every single virtual machine running on an ESXi host, there is a corresponding process running on the hypervisor's own little operating system, the VM kernel. That process is called VMX.
So if I have 10 VMs, I have 10 VMX processes running.
You have 10 of them. Now, this process runs in what's called user space on the host, but it's an incredibly privileged process. Its job is to handle all the heavy lifting of emulation.
Emulation? What do we emulate?
Well, think about it. If your Windows VM wants to draw a 3D graphic for a fancy HMI or send a network packet or, I don't know, write to a virtual USB drive you've connected, it's talking to a virtual device, a piece of hardware that doesn't actually exist.
It's a software simulation of a graphics card or a network card.
Exactly. And the VMX process is what provides that simulation. It's the translator. It takes the request from the guest VM about this fake hardware and translates it into a real system call that the hypervisor's kernel can understand and execute on the real hardware.
So the VMX process is the gatekeeper. It's standing right on that border, right on that fence between the guest VM and the hypervisor's kernel.
Precisely. And because it has to handle all this complex data, you're talking graphics commands, USB protocols, all sorts of weird stuff, it has a massive, massive attack surface. It has to parse these incredibly complicated, sometimes undocumented data structures being sent to it by the guest OS.
And parsing complex, untrusted data is where bugs live.
Always. It's the original sin of software development. And CVE 2025-2022-25 is what we call an arbitrary right vulnerability. It means an attacker who already has administrative rights inside one of the guest VMs.
Okay, so they've already compromised, say, a low-priority web server running on that host.
Right, they're admin inside that one VM. From there, they can graft a very specific malformed request and send it to the VMX process that's managing their VM.
They send a poisoned packet to the emulator.
That's a great way to put it. And because of a flaw in how the VMX process validates that request, it's likely a heap overflow or maybe an integer underflow, some classic memory corruption bug. It doesn't reject it as garbage. Instead, it takes that poison data and it writes it into memory.
But not just any memory, not its own memory.
That's the arbitrary part, and that's what makes it so devastating. A good exploit doesn't just crash the process. It lets the attacker control where in memory that data gets written. And if you can control where the computer writes data, you can overwrite something critical, like an instruction pointer or a function address.
You're telling the CPU, hey, the next piece of code you should execute isn't what you think it is. It's this little piece of code right over here.
And right over here is the malicious shellcode the attacker just injected into memory.
And since the VMX process is effectively a bridge to the kernel, one foot on each side of the fence.
You escape the sandbox, you're done. You move from what we call the guest context to the host context. The game is over.
I want to pause there because that single shift from guest to host is monumental. It's a complete change in the state of the game. In a traditional attack, if I hack a web server, okay, I'm stuck on that web server.
Right.
I have to start scanning the network, looking for other servers, trying to find another vulnerability to get to the next box.
We call that lateral movement. It's noisy. It takes time. It triggers intrusion detection systems, or you hit firewalls. It's a grind.
But here, with this exploit,
here you have vertical movement. You don't go sideways, you go down. You drop straight through the floor into the hypervisor. You don't need to scan the network. Why would you? You are now the god of that physical box.
wow.
You have direct, raw access to the physical memory of every other virtual machine running on that same host. You can just read their RAM, you can dump their encryption keys, steal their passwords right out of memory, or just power them off.
And there are no firewalls between one VM's memory and the hypervisor that controls it.
None. There can't be. It is a fundamental bypass of the entire network security model that we spent the last 20 years building.
This leads us directly into part 2, because this is not just an IT problem. This is the new PLC, why OT should care.
This is where we really need to challenge the prevailing mindset of our listeners who work in operational technology.
We usually think of OT security as protecting the PLCs, right? The programmable logic controllers. Those rugged little boxes from Rockwell or Siemens or Schneider that are physically wired to the valves and the motors and the pumps.
And rightfully so. I mean, those devices control the physics. They're incredibly important. But over the last 10 years, we have seen this massive, unstoppable wave of convergence. To run a modern plant, you don't just need PLCs anymore. You need compute.
You need servers.
Yeah.
You need Windows and Linux servers to run the whole operation.
You need a lot of servers. You need a historian server to log all the process data for regulatory compliance. You need a SCADA application server to actually run the control room screens. You might need an asset management server to track version control for your PLC code. You absolutely need an authentication server like Active Directory or some other identity service.
And where do all those servers live?
Yeah.
In a modern plant, they aren't individual beige boxes humming under a desk anymore.
God, no. In 99% of modern facilities, every single one of those critical servers is a virtual machine. And they're all running, consolidated on a small cluster of maybe 2 or 3 powerful ESXi hosts sitting in a rack somewhere in a clean data center.
So if I, as an attacker, compromise just one of those ESXi hosts using this VMX escape we just described,
you haven't just compromised one server. You have compromised the entire control room. You haven't touched a single PLC. You haven't sent a single malicious Modbus packet. But you have completely blinded the operators. You've stopped all the data logging. You have locked the engineers out of their own systems.
That's why the source material called the Hypervisor the new PLC.
It is the ultimate availability kill switch. Think about it from the perspective of a ransomware operator. I don't want to spend months reverse engineering your specific water treatment process. That's hard work. I don't want to learn ladder logic. That's a niche skill.
You just want leverage. You want to cause pain so you get paid.
I just want to stop your operations so you pay me the ransom. It's a business. If I can get control of the ESXi host, I don't need to gracefully shut down your VMs. I can just encrypt the underlying file system, the VMFS volumes, where the virtual disks are stored, and every single server on that host stops instantly.
A total plant shutdown. And you achieved it without knowing a single thing about OT protocols.
Zero. And you break determinism. That's a phrase the source used that really stood out to me as well. Determinism it's the religion of OT engineering. Input A must lead to output B every single time, without variation.
It has to be predictable.
Exactly. When the hypervisor is compromised, you lose that predictability entirely. You can no longer trust the state of the system. Is that virtual network cable from your HMI actually connected to the firewall? You think it is. But maybe the attacker from the hypervisor reconfigured the virtual switch to secretly mirror all your traffic to themselves.
Is the backup you're trying to restore from even clean?
You have no idea. Think about that. If the attacker has a persistent piece of malware in the hypervisor's memory, they can intercept the read and write calls to the backup storage. They could inject malware into your clean backup as you restore the file.
That is an absolute nightmare. That means your mean time to recovery, your MTTR, isn't just about how fast you can copy files back. It's about spending days or weeks validating that the very universe those files are being restored into is actually real and not a hostile illusion.
It turns a 4-hour recovery into a 4-week forensic investigation. And that, right there, is the leverage the attackers want. That's what gets them paid.
So we've established the mechanics. We've established the stakes. The floor is gone. Gravity is off. Now let's get into the real lessons. Part 3, immediate action.
Okay, and we're operating under the first 72 hours constraint here.
Right. This is critical. Let's assume you, the listener, are in a situation where you cannot immediately patch. Maybe the plant is running a critical batch process that can't be interrupted. Maybe the automation vendor hasn't certified the latest VMware patch yet. We see this all the time in OT. You can't just run Windows Update and reboot everything.
So we need compensating controls. These aren't fixes. They are things you do to reduce the exploitability and, if you are exploited, to reduce the blast radius.
Okay, action item number 1 from the notes. Isolate the management plane. Now, this sounds like standard generic advice, but I want to get really specific. What does this look like on the wire? What ports are we blocking?
This is all about network architecture. In so many OT environments we assess, we see what are called flat networks. The ESXi management interface, the web page you log into to manage the host, is accessible from the same VLAN, the same network segment, as the engineer's regular workstations.
It's all about convenience. I want to be able to manage the server right from my desk where I check my email.
And that convenience is a massive vulnerability. If an attacker sends a phishing email to that engineer and compromises their workstation, they can now pivot directly to the ESX login page. To properly isolate the management plane, you need a dedicated management VLAN that is used only for management traffic. Nothing else.
And how do you get onto that VLAN? You can't just plug in.
No. The best practice is to use what's called a privileged access workstation, or a PAW. A jump host is okay, but a PAW is better.
Can you explain the PAW concept for us? What makes it different from just a regular jump box?
A PAW is a dedicated physical laptop or maybe a tightly controlled virtual machine that is used only for high-security administrative tasks. It has no internet access. It has no email client. It has all USB ports disabled via policy. You do not browse Reddit on your PAW. You don't check the news. You only use it to log into vCenter or an ESXi host.
So if my daily driver machine gets hit by a drive-by download while I'm browsing a news site, the attacker is completely stuck.
Yeah.
They're on a machine that simply cannot route to the management VLAN. The path doesn't exist.
Exactly. You go to your network firewall and you create a rule that says, block TCT ports 443 for the web interface and 902 for the vSphere client heartbeat from everything except the single static IP address of that one PAW.
And what about multi-factor authentication, MFA?
It's completely non-negotiable, but here's the challenge we see in a lot of OT environments. Some of the older versions of vCenter, maybe versions 6.5 or 6.7 that are still kicking around, they don't support modern MFA methods easily.
So what's the workaround if you can't put MFA directly on vCenter?
You put the MFA at the jump host or the PAW access level. You can't even initiate the RDP session to the jump host without getting a push notification or typing in a one-time code. You add layers of friction to the administrative path. Make it hard.
Okay, that makes sense. Action item number 2, reduce guest-to-host channels. This one is really interesting to me because it feels like it addresses the VMX vulnerability we talked about directly.
It does. This is pure attack surface reduction. Remember, the exploit works because the VMX process has to parse all that complex data from the guest. The more features you have enabled on a virtual machine, the more code the VMX process has to run to emulate those features.
So we're just trying to make the target smaller.
Exactly. And specifically, the two big ones to look for are 3D acceleration and unnecessary USB controllers.
Why are those even on by default in so many environments?
It's usually laziness or what I call template drift. When an admin creates a new VM template, they often just click next, next, next through the wizard. By default, VMware might add a virtual USB 2.0 or 3.0 control just in case you want to plug in a thumb drive later. It might enable 3D graphics because, well, why not? It doesn't seem to hurt.
But a SCADA server doesn't need to run Crisis. It's displaying 2D vector lines and numbers.
Exactly. But that 3D emulation code, the virtual SVGA driver that lives inside the VMX process, is millions of lines of incredibly complex C++ code. That is a massive, fertile playground for attackers to go hunting for memory corruption bugs.
So the advice is simple. Turn it off.
Go into the settings for every critical VM in your OT environment. Edit the settings. If there's a USB controller and it's not being actively used for, say, a physical license dongle, remove it. Uncheck the box that says Accelerate 3D Graphics. Just get rid of it.
Does that require a reboot of the VM?
In most cases, yes, it does. But that's a planned maintenance window with a 5-minute reboot. It's not a catastrophic, unplanned crash in the middle of production. You're stripping the car down for a race. You take out the radio, you take out the air conditioning. Less weight means less drag, or in this case, fewer exploitable code paths.
Okay, let's move to part 4. This is the section I really want to dig into because it's proactive. Hunting with a substrate mindset.
Right. This is where we separate the pros from the amateurs in incident response.
Most security teams, their first instinct is to look for malware. They run an antivirus scan. They're looking for known file hashes, virus.exe on the C drive.
But if the attacker has escaped the guest and is living in the hypervisor, they are not dropping files on the C drive of the Windows VM. They're operating in the memory space of the ESXi kernel itself. Your Windows antivirus can't see them. It's physically impossible.
So what are we looking for? If I can't look for files, what am I looking for? What logs do I open?
You need to get comfortable with the ESHA shell. You need to be looking for signs of tampering and persistence at the hypervisor level.
Okay, let's list the specific logs. If I SSH into my ESXi host, which I should only be doing from my paw, as we just established, where do I CD to?
You're going to go to verilog. The first two files you're going to want to look at are shell.log and auth.log.
And what am I grepping for in there? What am I looking for?
You're looking for anomalies and access patterns. For example, ESSA creates a very clear log entry every time the SSH service is enabled or disabled. It's a common tactic for attackers to enable SSH, do their work, and then disable it to cover their tracks. So if you see the SSH service turn on at 3 a.m. on a Sunday and there is no corresponding change request ticket in your system,
That's a verified incident. You treat it as a compromise until proven otherwise.
immediately. You also want to look at hosty.log. This log file tracks all the management activities, things done through the web client or vCenter. You're looking for the creation of new users, which is a classic persistence technique.
Right, attackers love to create a backdoor user, something that looks plausible, like admin2 or support user.
Or they'll just reactivate the default root account if your policy was to disable it. You can run a simple command, iscli system account list, to see all the current local users on the host. If you see a user there that you don't recognize, you have a very serious problem.
Okay, now let's talk about the real persistence mechanism, the VVIB threat. This was a huge part of the research material, and it sounds particularly nasty.
It is VIB. It stands for vSphere Installation Bundle. And this is the legitimate, official way you're supposed to install software on an ESXi host. Things like third-party hardware drivers, monitoring agents, software updates.
It's basically a package manager, like after Yum in Linux.
Right. But attackers have completely weaponized it. They create their own malicious VIBs that contain their backdoor or rootkit, and they'll name it something that looks innocent, like VMware-driver-update.5 or something similar.
But hold on, doesn't VMware sign their packages? Isn't there some kind of digital signature check to prevent you from installing random code?
There is, and it's a good control. ESXi has a feature called acceptance levels. By default, it's usually set to partner-supported or VMware accepted, which means it should block any unsigned community-developed packages.
Should, being the very operative word there.
If the attacker has already gained root access on the box, which they get from our CVE 2025-22225 exploit, they can simply change the acceptance level. They can run a single command to tell the host, hey ESI, from now on I want you to trust packages with no signature at all. Just accept community packages. Then they can install their malicious VAB with no warnings.
And what does that malicious VIB actually do once it's installed?
It creates the ultimate form of persistence. A VIB, when installed, is written into the boot bank of the hypervisor. It becomes part of the operating system. Every single time that physical server reboots, the hypervisor kernel loads that malicious VIB back into memory. It effectively reinfects itself on every single startup.
So rebooting the server doesn't clean the system. It actually does the opposite.
It doesn't clean it at all. It just cements the attacker's foothold. It ensures their malware survives reboots, survives patching, survives almost everything short of a full wipe.
So how do we hunt for this? How do I find a malicious VIB?
Again, from the ESXi shell, you run the command exli software vib list.
Yeah.
This will dump a list of every single installed package on the host.
And that's going to be a long list, I'm guessing.
It is. It can be hundreds of lines long, but you can filter it or just eyeball it. You're looking at the columns that say vendor and acceptance level. If you see a vendor name that is listed as community or unknown or an installation date that lines up with your suspicious timeline, that is your smoking gun. That's what you investigate immediately.
Is there a way to verify the signatures themselves programmatically?
Yes, and this is a great check to run. There's a command exli software vib signature verify. It will iterate through every VIB on the system and tell you if any of the digital signatures are missing, invalid, or broken.
That sounds like a script that every single VMware administrator should be running on a daily basis and alerting on any failures.
It should absolutely be part of your monitoring baseline. If a signature check suddenly fails when it was passing yesterday, you should have alerts firing and pagers going off immediately.
Okay, this transitions us perfectly into part 5.
Yeah.
Validation and remediation. Let's say we did it. We ran that command. We found a malicious VIB from an unknown vendor. We found a weird user in auth.log. We know we're compromised.
Now comes the hard conversation with management.
The natural human instinct is clean it up. Let's delete that weird user. Let's run the command to uninstall that malicious VIB. Problem solved, right?
And that is absolutely 100% the wrong instinct.
Why?
Because you cannot prove that you found everything. The attacker had kernel-level access. They had God mode on your hypervisor. For all you know, they could have modified the binary of the ALS command so that it hides their files from you. They could have patched the kernel directly in memory to hide their processes.
So the system itself has become an unreliable witness.
Yeah.
You cannot trust anything it tells you about its own state.
Exactly. We call this the dirty substrate problem. If the floor of your house is rotten all the way through, you can't just sweep the dirt off the top and say it's clean. You have to rip out the floorboards and replace the foundation.
So rebuild the substrate.
Hmm.
What does that actually mean in practice? What are the steps?
It means you go scorched earth. You have to assume the host is a total loss. Step 1 is to evacuate any VMs you think are still clean to another known good host in the cluster. Then, you wipe the compromised hardware.
Just format the drives.
Not just a quick format, a deep multipass format. Then, you reinstall ESXi from trusted, verified media. That means you download a fresh ISO directly from the Broadcom or VMware support portal. You do not use the ISO that's been sitting on your local file share for 6 months because the attacker might have Trojaned it.
Good point.
And then you immediately patch it to the latest level before connecting it back to the main network. You apply all your security hardening configurations. You disable SSH. You enable lockdown mode. You set the correct acceptance levels. And only then, once it's fully hardened and patched, do you even think about moving workloads back onto it.
What about passwords? What about all the credentials?
You have to assume every single credential that ever touched that compromised host is burned. It's gone. The local root password has to be changed. The vCenter service account credentials stored on that host have to be rotated. The domain admin credentials you used to RDP into a Windows VM that was running on that host, probably scraped from memory by the attacker, they have to be rotated, all of them.
That is a massive undertaking. For a large environment, that could be weeks of painful work.
It is. It's incredibly painful. But the alternative is leaving a sophisticated attacker's back door open in your most critical infrastructure. And in 6 months, when they come back and ransom you again, explaining to the board that you thought you cleaned it up is a career-ending conversation.
In the notes, we mentioned a new KPI to track here, a new key performance indicator. It's not number of hosts updated, it's time to minimum viable operations.
This is for the managers and directors listening. Don't measure your team's success by how many servers they've fixed. That's the wrong metric. Measure it by how fast they can get the most critical business process running again, safely.
So that might mean, for a few days, running the critical HMI on a completely separate, standalone physical backup laptop while your team carefully rebuilds the main virtualization cluster.
Exactly. Operations come first. Forensics and perfect cleaning come second. Get the plant running safely, then take your time to do the rebuild right.
Okay, let's wrap this up with part 6. This is the big picture view, the philosophy of isolation.
This is the real lesson, the thing we need to internalize from all of this.
For 20 years, we've been sold a story. The story is that virtualization is magic, that the hypervisor is this impenetrable wall between VMs. The sales pitch was, don't worry, put all your eggs in one basket. This basket is made of steel.
That was the fallacy of logical isolation. We started to treat a software boundary as if it were a physical air gap. We convinced ourselves it was just as good.
But software is written by humans.
Yeah.
And humans make mistakes. Code has bugs.
And CVE 2025 is the proof. That wall is porous. It's not a steel wall, it's a software fence. And all fences eventually get holes in them.
So the really deep question we need to be asking ourselves now, and this is that axiom concept the source material brought up, is this. Which boundaries in our architecture do we treat as undeniable fundamental truths, as axioms?
And the answer is you cannot treat the hypervisor boundary as an axiom anymore. You just can't. You have to treat it as a variable. It might hold, but it might not. And you need a plan for when it fails.
So what does that mean in practice? For our most critical safety-related systems, the systems that prevent the chemical plant from having a catastrophic failure, maybe we need to think about physical isolation again.
Or at the very least, hardware-enforced isolation. Maybe your safety instrumented system, your SIS, shouldn't be a virtual machine running on the same cluster as your email gateway and the cafeteria menu server. Maybe that one critical function deserves its own dedicated physical hardware.
It's really a return to first principles. Complexity is the enemy of security.
And virtualization is the ultimate complexity engine. It is wonderful for efficiency and consolidation. It is absolutely terrible for inspectability and provable security.
This has been, wow, This has been heavy. We've covered a lot of ground.
We've gone from the internals of the VMX process all the way up to the philosophy of safety engineering.
Let's just recap the journey very quickly for everyone. We started with that vanishing floor, the quiet, terrifying realization that the substrate itself is under attack. We broke down the mechanics of the VMX escape, how an attacker moves vertically from guest to host.
We talked about why this matters to OT, reframing the hypervisor as the new PLC, the central availability kill switch for the entire modern plant.
We gave you that 72-hour battle plan for when you can't patch. Isolate your management plane using pause and dedicated VLANs. Minimize your attack surface by stripping out unnecessary virtual hardware like USB controllers and 3D graphics drivers.
Then we taught you how to hunt, using Escli to check for malicious VIBs by looking at acceptance levels and scanning your auth.log and shell.log for anomalous access.
And finally, we gave you the hard, painful truth about remediation. You do not clean a compromised hypervisor, you rebuild it from scratch.
It's a didactic roadmap. We wanted this to be more than just be careful out there. We wanted to give you a list of here's exactly what you do on Monday morning.
I want to leave everyone with one final provocation, a thought to chew on as you go about your day.
Go for it.
We talked about the landlord, we talked about the floor, we talked about trust. My question to you is this. If your digital floor disappeared today, if you suddenly couldn't trust the servers that your entire operation runs on, do you have a plan to build a new floor? Or are you just sitting there staring into the abyss hoping the landlord remembers to change the locks?
Hope is not a strategy. And relying on the perfection of software is not engineering. It's malpractice.
This has been the first episode of Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. We really hope this deep dive gave you the technical ammunition you need to go out and defend your infrastructure.
Stay vigilant and go verify your VIBs. Seriously.
Until the next episode.